3, 2, 1. All right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome tonight. Welcome this evening. I'm Stephen Pidgeon, and hey, guess what? We're doing the dig tonight. And the dig is going to be kind of interesting because the dig is going to be a discussion. Let's call it an impromptu discussion. Joining me tonight is Chelle Wagner and John Barr, two very good friends. Hey, guys. So glad to see you guys here tonight. And we're going to be discussing some of the aspects of the Cepher. Now, I could tell you, we've got there's some verses in virtually every book of the Cepher that are, well, we could call them problematic, if you will, but they have been newly translated to indicate something more than what we initially thought. And so talking with John and talking with Chelle and talking with other people, you know, we've had an opportunity to dig into scripture, to dig in and to see what we can find. And that's what this is about. This program is going to be called The Dig from here on out. We're going to be digging into scripture to see what we can find. And you never can tell. I wanted to bring in these two so that we could get a different perspective besides my myopic condition, as you know, which sometimes I could be a one-way street, you know, driving down at high speeds too, I might add. Yeah, all right. Okay. Well, so anyway, Chelle, so here's what we're gonna be looking at, John. We're gonna be looking at this passage on the scriptural research featuring myself, moi, with panelists Chelle Wagner and John Barr. Hope I spelled that correct.
Yes.
Okay. Now, Chelle, I want to ask you, you're not part of the Wagner group that's beating up Ukrainians in Ukraine, are you?
No, I've kept myself back from joining that group.
All right. Okay. A little self-discipline there. That's good.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Now, I want to give my alert here. This is a very important part of what goes on anything. This is 18 U.S. Code section 241. This is a statute that's called conspiracy against rights. And this is a federal law, and it currently is on the book. And you can see the public law citations down at the bottom of this. And it reads like this. If two or more persons conspire to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate any person in any state, territory, commonwealth, possession, or district in the free exercise or enjoyment of any right or privilege secured to him by the Constitution or laws of the United States, or because of his having so exercised the same, or if two or more persons go in disguise on the highway or on the premises of another with the intent to prevent or hinder his free exercise or enjoyment of any right or privilege so secured, they shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 10 years. That's good news. It won't be more than 10 years, or both, unless if death results from the acts committed in violation of this section, or if such acts include kidnapping or an attempt to kidnap, aggravated sexual abuse, or an attempt to commit aggravated sexual abuse, or an attempt to kill, well, they shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for any term of years, or for life, or both, or may even be sentenced to death. Did you know that was the law?
Very
kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah, that's nice to know.
Yeah, it's incredible. That's existing federal law right there, and that's 18 U.S. Code section 241. But it's also memorialized in all these public laws. You know, Public 9284, 82 Stat 75, Public Law 100 690, etc. So that's existing. All right. So we're going to be digging into the Beni Elohim.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Right.
Okay, so here we go. Here is the first verse of our controversial segment. And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born unto them. Now here, I put up the Hebrew here for us so we can take a look. And besides, it gives me a chance to, as you know, annotate. Without the chance to annotate, what are we doing, right? Right. Okay, now I want to ask you a question here. Now, you know that when we start talking about the daughters, right? So we see here a couple of things. First of all, we're talking about when men began to multiply. So here we see the word the men, right? Adam, ha-Adam, using Adam as mankind.
Mhm.
And larov alpeni, upon the face of ha-Adamah, not haaretz, the earth, but ha-Adamah, banit. Now, this is interesting because look at this word for a second, okay? We're going to see it right here. Oh, excuse me, I've got a typo in that. It's actually banot, right? Banot.
Mhm.
So what we see with this banot is what? This is going to be like benihin, but banot, the feminine plural, showing us what? Daughters. Daughters. So I'm going to ask you guys, in taking a look at this passage, what we see in the Hebrew, that this pretty much conforms with what we see in the Hebrew, right? This English conforms with the Hebrew. Yoldu, like Yeled, right? Yeled being infant, Yoldu, lachem, born to them, right?
Mhm.
So pretty much non-controversial here, eh?
I agree.
Yeah,
Okay. John, you got anything on it? It looks pretty straightforward, huh?
yeah.
Okay. Daughters. All right. Now, here's where we start getting into the hard part of the topic. All right. So we're going to see here, Vayiru, Beni Elohim. Now, here it is right here. Now, Chelle, what's your take on who they're talking about here, the Beni Elohim?
Well, I believe it would have been a specific class of angelic beings. Some people call them the Watchers. Some people call it the Elder Race. But I believe it was a very powerful, specific class of angelic beings.
All right. Now, when you say the elder race, what do you mean? Where have you heard about this?
Timothy Alberino discussed it that way in his book called Birthright. Very, very interesting book. He's the one who worked with Steve Quayle and has done so much digging into in the archaeological aspects of antiquity, with the monolithic structures and whatnot all over the world.
Right. But he calls these Ben Elohim an elder class.
And he calls them the elder race. And his premise on that is that we tend to think as humans that everything revolves around us, that Earth was made for us, that things are done for us. We have a very us-centered view of things. Whereas he's saying we've got to really understand everything. We've got to look at the whole equation and say that, things were in existence before we came on the scene.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a really good point. Now, John, we've talked a little bit about this in the Ancient Days class over at Cepher Academy, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And, and I mean, I have to tell you, Chelle, I mean, what Tim Alberino is talking about, I mean, we've got this record now. And, I'm not one who believes in carbon dating. Okay. I just don't believe the carbon dating at all. I just think it's a bunch of nonsense and it's a wild guess predicated upon a wild guess. But one thing I do agree with is that I do think you can date something by appointing to the signs in the heavens, appointing to the signs in the heavens. So, for instance, there is this set of monuments on the island of Malta, and one of them is called Gigantica. And these monuments, I think there's 9 of them, but each one of them has a different doorway. Right. So, a lot of people think, well, these doorways are set up in order to mark the vernal equinox. Well, in these cases, these doorways were not set up to mark the vernal equinox at all. Rather, they were set up to mark and to see the star Sirius. Now, it's very possible that something happened in the ancient world that may have been a cataclysm that came out from the star Sirius. And so they set up these temples to be forever looking at Sirius to see if something else was going to come out of that star system, you know.
Right.
But when you see that, they're all facing slightly different from one another. So the slight difference in the facing of it, so you can see, for instance, stuff like this, you know, where the temple is faced like this, and you have a doorway here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there's an altar back here. So this is got a viewpoint that looks like this. Well, okay, that's fine, except this one over here is off. It's got a viewpoint like this. Well, what's going on? It's because Sirius is at a different place in the view. So as a consequence, what we see is that you can date when you could see Sirius from this point. You can go back into the stellariums and so forth and map it out to exactly the year you can find this visualization of Sirius. Okay, so talking again about the Tim Alberino theory, which seems to be supported by the documents, it's also supported in Scripture. For instance, what we see in Genesis 1, and let me see, I think I have a slide on this actually. Let me see if I can find that. Just 1 second. And I think I might have a slide on this because it's, let's see, just a minute. Yeah, here we go. Here's the slide. Let me see if I can share this again here. But this one, I think, is going to tell us something that is going to be indicative of what we're talking about. Now, here's our slide here. Again, this is Genesis 1:26. And Elohim said, "Let us make man in our image." Now, I'm just going to say it, and I'll say it. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. This us part in our image is absolutely in the Hebrew. Okay, there is no getting around it. It's in the Hebrew. Okay, so let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing. Now, what's interesting about this is that here we say, this is Elohim saying this. See, it's not Yahweh saying it. It's Elohim saying it. And so when you see that Elohim is saying it, and then Elohim created man in his own image, in the image of Elohim, he created him, Zakar and Nekabah, male and female. So what I find interesting that is that Zakar and Nekabah are what you would call Beni Elohim. Very clearly, they are clearly the children of Elohim at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Except I misspelled Elohim. That's pretty bad. Pretty bad. Okay. I mean, here's a word right here. How can you misspell it? But when you see that, so if these are clearly the children of Elohim, then we have an issue. Okay, so what's this business about Adam and so on and so forth? Well, Adam may have been created much, much later. Much, much later. And if that's the case, I mean, what do we know? I mean, when you think about this, let's think about this for a second. When you talk about Adam being created much, much later, does this imply more than one cataclysm of the earth? So we can see very clearly we've got Noah's flood. That's one cataclysm.
Mm-hmm.
But were there others? And, you know, we've had a discussion about this recently too, talking about, okay, Noah's flood appears to be buttressed in every, you know, of mythology on earth. It's in Chinese writing, it's in Hindu writing, it's in Egyptian writing. Okay. And that signals one particular time. And we have a count going from that, from Noah and his family. And we have a count of the 22 patriarchs that precede Noah. But even when you look closely, and would you guys mind if we take a look real quick, like at Genesis? I want to take a look at Genesis 1, just for the sake of it. Let me see if I can find our, yeah, here we go. Here's our eSword here. Let's share this for a second. Now, Chelle, you work eSword, right? You use
Yeah.
eSword?
I do.
It's a great source. And for people that don't have it, you can tell on mine that I have a great deal of downloads. So when you're using eSword, if you go up here to the download tab here, you click on that, you can click on Bibles. And when you click on Bibles, it gives you a whole roster of Bibles that you can download into your eSword, including the Cepher. You can get the Cepher on here too. And it's not the complete Cepher, it's a 66 book version of it, but you can get the Cepher and you can get a number of others. Now, there's other Bibles that you can also buy to put on here too, right? The Message, the New Revised Standard, et cetera. You can buy those, but there's a whole roster of free downloads that you can put in here. Now, in addition to the Bibles that you can download on the eSword module, there's also commentaries and dictionaries. Now, with the dictionaries, you can see that I already have installed the Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew Lexicon, the Encyclopedia, the Easton Bible Dictionary, the Fawcett Bible Dictionary, the Hastings Dictionary of the Bible, Hitchcock, the ISBE, the KGC, the Mounts, the RMAC, the Smith, Strong's, Thayer's Greek Lexicon, Torrey's New Topic Textbook. See, all of those things are here, and you can download those and load them up on your own eSword so that you've got capability, right? So you can do what we're talking about here. Now, I want to show you, I'm going to take a look real quickly. There's been some discussion about this. I'm going to see what you think about this, John. Okay, so here we are, Genesis 1:2, okay? And so we see here, Ve'haaretz, and the earth, right? Hayaha. Now what? Tohu. Now, look at Tohu for a second, okay? And again, this is Strong's. We can look at Brown Driver Briggs too. But when we see in Strong's, what do we see here? We see something very interesting, meaning to lie waste, right? To lie waste. That is a desert, a worthless thing, a wilderness, okay? An empty place without form. Now, we have used the passage without form and void, but this could very easily be translated as, and the earth was wasted, right? Okay, so that's with tohu, okay, wasted. And now let's take a look at the next word in that phrase, which is vabohu. Now, of course, we see that it's going to tell us that the root word here is bohu, even though there's a vav up here. And for those who don't know the Hebrew very well, when you have this idea of vav, beit, he, and vav, this vav here is, of course, going to be a prefix meaning and. And then our word is bohu. And bohu is what? An unused root meaning to be empty, of vacuity. Okay, so you could say formless and void, but you can also say an undistinguishable ruin.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's possible to say in Genesis 1:2 that the earth was a wasteland, and a ruin. Okay, so when we talk about a wasteland and a ruin, then what? Let's continue here and see what this is going to say. And so Yah continues on saying, Choshek, dark, and dark covered the face, pani, ha tehom. of the abyss, the subterranean water, right? The Ruach Elohim hovered or brooded over over the face of the Mayim, the face of the water, right? So when we're talking about this, the question with Adam is to go and replenish the earth, to replenish the earth. So we have something here in Genesis 1:2 that may be indicating that there was, in the beginning of this narrative, the earth was already a wasteland and ruined. Right? Doesn't that imply something?
Yes. Yes, it does.
What do you think of, John?
Well, I keep looking at this word was. And was, I think maybe could be also became.
Mhm.
Okay, so go back to one. In the beginning, created the heavens and earth. And it doesn't seem that it was created void and empty in a wasteland, but it became. There's something in that between verse 1 and verse 2. That's the disaster. Now, another thing about the words in here, darkness was upon the face of the deep. Darkness doesn't just appear. Darkness comes when the light is removed.
Right.
So the heaven and earth were created, there was light, and then it became, because some event happened, became empty, a wasteland, and there was no light. How do we know there was no light? Because it says there was darkness, and the Ruach moved upon the face of the waters. Waters suggests judgment. That we get that from Noah's flood. It was a judgment thing. Something bad's going on here. I mean, real bad. Then what's done? Turn the light back on. So there is an epic in 3 verses right there. That is, we don't know what the epic is.
Yeah.
And when we talk about, I've often wondered where did my soul come from? Sometimes I mean, this is just me. Was this planet totally populated and everybody was happy and something horrible showed up and wiped everybody out? And here we are with an opportunity to find our way back to what it was before when it was in the beginning, heaven and earth. I don't know, this is kind of a strange way of looking at it. That part's just me, but the words here suggest that something was okay in verse 1, and then something really horrible took place and wiped everything out, including the light, and face of the deep. There was an abyss, there was a hole, and where the earth used to be, so to speak. And then the spirit moving across the face of the waters. This is, a spirit, Elohim shows up. This is the boss. And said, let there be light. Said. And the light obeyed in return. Now, and the darkness fled. So, I mean, fill in the blanks there, what we're looking at. And I think that is a terrible event. We talked about this the other night. Look at the moon. In fact, look at this entire solar system. this planet is the only thing that's got life on it. Everything else is a wasteland full of poisonous gas. You know, this storm that continuously rages on the surface of Jupiter. You know, there's another one on Saturn. They're all like, you can't live there. If Mars had anything on it, its atmosphere was totally wiped away. You talk about a wasteland.
Right.
No atmosphere, no life. Even if you have water, I mean, whatever's there, there's some ice, they think, under here and under that rock, and they keep looking. But yeah, the surface of Mars appears like what's described in verse 2.
Mhm.
Tohu bohu. Yeah, a wasted ruin.
Yeah.
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 And so, and there is some evidence, tiny as it might be, suggesting that there was something on Mars. But let me tell you, there ain't anything there now. There ain't anything on the moon. Look at the moon surface. I mean, it's total bombardment.
Yeah, total wasteland. Yeah.
And
Well,
then there's a planet missing. The asteroid
And there's a
belt.
planet missing, right? Yeah.
It got blown to smithereens.
Yep.
Now, who lived there?
Yeah, that's a
So-
question. Yeah.
Maybe that was us.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting about this, John, is that when we talk about this, you know, I think what we're seeing now, one thing that we were told in school as kids, well, the Earth has been around for millions and millions and millions of years, and the universe has been around for billions of years, and the sun someday is going to go out in about 6.5 billion years from now, right? And so we're given this confidence as children. Oh, everything is the way it was, and it's going to continue to be. Tomorrow is going to be just like yesterday and the way it was.
Yeah.
But as we start to look at the scriptural story, we begin to see, no, just wait a minute. We know there was at least one cataclysm recorded, which is Noah's flood. But Genesis 1 infers that there was a preceding cataclysm. Like, let me give you an example. Genesis 1:28. And Elohim blessed them, and Elohim said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Now, I pulled up this word here so that we could look at it. So this word in that passage is malay, and it's a primitive root, and it means to fill, right? To fill, to be full of, in a wide application, accomplish, confirm, consecrate, be fenced, fulfill, etc., flow, furnish, presume, replenish. Well, now you don't. If you're storing up, let's say you open a new grocery store, and you're going to stock the shelves. Do you replenish the shelves when you're opening a new grocery store? No, you replenish the shelves after people have come in and bought the stuff, and then you resupply, right? So replenish implies supply, right? So go forth and multiply and resupply the earth with life. So this also infers there was something on here before. There was something here before that became a wasted ruin, and now Elohim show up and say, you need to resupply the earth. Now, I think that what we're talking about here is a distinguishable class of humanity, Zakar, Nekaba, male and female, a distinguishable class of humanity from the humanity that would come at the hands of Yahweh, who would create Ish and Isha, Adam and Hua, really fire beings or light beings, if you will, who may have been flesh, but were clothed in fire, clothed in a heavenly fire, a light, that when they took of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they managed to extinguish that light, and they saw, oh, hey, we're naked, because the light was gone. The flame that surrounded them was gone. And they had taken on the flesh of Zakar and Nekaba.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, so we see two new truants. Okay, so let's go back to our PowerPoint here, John, and let's go back to what you were saying, because I think we're going to find something there. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, let me talk a minute about this theory of the millions of year old Earth. This comes from, I think his name is Charles Lyell. This is a guy in England, I believe, who is thought to, or is credited with the old Earth idea and the millions and millions of years old. And he's the one that came up with, somebody in there in this same group, this is 1800s, that the way things are today, the way things are in the present are the way things were in the past. The present is the answer to the past. Well, that's backwards from the scripture. The past is the answer to the present and the future, because it was all written before the foundation of the earth. Okay, the world, and that world term is usually can be translated as cosmos. It's not just about earth, it's cosmos.
Sure, that's the Greek term for it.
Right. So, but this infinitely old Earth and solar system is a theory. It's a theory. Nobody knows. They don't know this. They don't know this. Nobody was there. We don't have any videos. We just have somebody's idea. And it came from these English and Western Europeans in the time of this new age of enlightenment. And mostly these theories that drive our science today as theories, and that includes evolution, because you cannot have evolution without having millions and millions of years.
Right. In fact, even billions of years. Even billions of years. You still can't get there statistically.
So that theory had to take root first before Darwin came up with his selection of the species, or whatever, that his work, evolution. And I just lost my train a minute, but
well, while you're recovering that, John, remember Darwin's book is The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Preferred Races in the Struggle for Life. That's the full title of his book.
Right. So this whole thing is a racist kind of deal that's rooted back in 1900. Oh, I know what I was thinking about. Thing that drove these theories and all of the areas of science started with Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton was a really smart guy.
1600s, late 1600s, yeah.
Yeah, he was the earliest. He's the first one who what he discovered about physics is, and he wrote the book, Universal Laws of Physics. Now, this is correct. The universal laws of physics are not theories. It's math, and it works every time. It works in the lab, and it works out in the field. Isaac's material is real science, come from a genius kind of guy. But other people in other areas of science, like geology, biology, geography, so forth and so on, archaeology, they all had to get on the bandwagon and come up with their universal laws of archaeology, geology, biology, all this, literally mimicking in their own professions and sciences themselves as Newton in their science. You see this? So Newton is real. These other people are fabricated, and they fabricated copying Newton and created scientific religion.
Right.
That's what
Trust
we're looking
the
at
science.
now.
Trust the science. I'm sorry, I'm not going there.
That's right. And so who did they attack? They attacked the scriptures. And it's still doing it. I mean, it's in your face now. So, but this is what we see in the theories of these other sciences. They're all rooted. The first one is the billion-year-old planet. And when after that, the paleontology guys jumped on it, and you look at a cross section of a canyon and the rock layers, and you go down to that bedrock. There's this zone that there are no fossils below a certain year, certain age. You know, they got all these names: the Triassic, the Jurassic, the Cretaceous. They got all these different. I don't remember them all, but they're there. But there's a place where there is no life, no fossils. But when they got into these layers, they looked at the layering of the fossils, and it seemed like the smallest ones were down at the bottom, you know, and these were really amoeba or whatever. And then as it went up through the strata, you get all these different bones from different animals. Well, this gave rise to, well, this must be the level, it's like opening a book of evolution. We started from snails and moved all the way up the line into mammals, and then into human beings are buried in the last layer from the top, see. But this is not true. This is a fabrication. This is an imagination. This is what, it was a good idea, but it doesn't work because we know about Mount St. Helens.
Right.
And there are stratas laid out on every planet of Earth. They know now because of the drilling that all of the stratas of sedimentary rock on top of that dead layer before there was any life are all laid down in the same sequence, one right after another.
Exactly. That's it. You know, I remember when they went to St. Helens, there were a couple of geologists from UW, University of Washington. Well, this was 2,000 years ago. This was 6,000 years ago. This was 12,000 years ago. And then they dug up the next layer and they found some kids' toys.
That's right.
From the 20th century. And the students were like, and what was that? 35,000 years ago? Or was it the time of the Planet of the Apes?
Well, there are boneyards in Montana, Wyoming, up there, Idaho. There are massive boneyards, and all the paleontology people know where all the big piles of bones are. And in those bones are dinosaurs and mammals and cats and dogs and every other thing. Why are they all piled up in the same place?
And
Because
human beings.
that was the only high ground left when the flood was coming. So everything that was still alive was moving to the high ground. And you can find this on every continent, the boneyard.
Yeah, there you go, John.
Everybody's bones are there. They're not lined up in some evolutionary fashion. They're laying there in a pile of panic.
Right.
Yeah, it's like Haeckel's sequence that he tried to claim that in the womb, the infant goes from being from being a fish to a pig to a monkey and he's trying to claim all this. And of course, now we know because of the advent of the ultrasound and so forth, we know exactly what the babies look like. They look like babies right from the get-go, and they become even more, incredibly looking like babies as the time of the pregnancy goes on. There's no looking like a pig or looking like a monkey or any of this other ridiculous nonsense that was proposed by this bombastic fool in the 19th century.
Well, these other theories, scientific theories, they're as good as any other theory. I had my physical geology professor, when the semester started, the first thing he was presenting on was the creation theories of the cosmos, of the universe, of the solar system.
Yeah.
And there are several: Big Bang, Little Bang, whatever. And the last theory he came in with, he had a big black book under his arm. And this is 1965, a long time ago.
Yeah.
He opened that book up and he started at Genesis 1:1 reading. And we're all dumbfounded sitting here. And he looks up and he says, well, this is another theory. Take notes. It's going to be on the test.
Yeah, it is. And when I look at that theory, John, and this is what we're talking about today, when I look at the theory that's showing up in Genesis, I mean, I spent 7 years just looking at Genesis 1:1, trying to get the full understanding of parameters of that. And I still don't get it. I mean, there's still more to talk about. Like this word Bere'shiyth, in the beginning, right? Or
Yeah.
in the beginnings, if you will.
It's
What
exciting.
exactly does that mean? That means the beginning of this narrative, right? In the beginning of this narrative, when we're talking about this history begins here. Now, we can see now that I don't support the millions of years old theory in any respect, and the carbon dating stuff is, in my opinion, is patent nonsense. But what we do see is a paleo record that precedes Adam by some period of time, and it appears to be a more than one cataclysm that appears there, because Yah is telling, or Elohim is telling the people, you go forth and multiply and replenish, resupply a place that used to have people on it, but were gone because of whatever former cataclysm happened. Now, a cataclysm would come again in the time of Noah, and the timing is given to us explicitly. Now, let's go back for a second. Let's see if we can track some of these events, because you mentioned something here just a minute ago, John, and I want to come back to it because I want to get this. I got to get this PowerPoint where we were here. We're going to go back a couple of slides here. Let's see. Oh yeah, 6:2. Yeah, let's go. Yeah, let's go into 6:3 for a minute, and let's take a look at that, because I want to share this with you, and then I want to get your opinion on this too. And Chelle, I want to get your opinion on this as well when we look at 6:3. Okay. So, we'll pop it up here now. Here we see this passage, and this, I think, and again, this passage is given this to us. It's given to us cryptically as to what's going on here, but we need to be able to see what is being said. Here it is. Okay, now, and Yahweh said, my Ruach shall not always strive with man, for that he's also flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. Now, again, this is the same passage. We're talking about the Ben Elohim. We're talking about the Ben Elohim coming down and doing this thing. But I found something very interesting in this passage, and I just want to share it with you guys, and we'll get a feel for it here. So when we look at this, so you see this, Vayi Omer, Yahweh Lo Yadon, right? And then this actually should be Ruach. And so this Ruach should be written, because this is, the way they have this pronounced here is they're leaving out the A, Ruach, my spirit, right? My Ruach, because the Yod here is the pronominal suffix on the word Ruach. But this Ruach should have a, there should be a chametz in here, and not just the Hirik Yod that we see here. But anyway, my Ruach, right? Ba Adam, in Adam. My spirit in Adam, right? I will not strive with, right? And so you see, so my spirit, la olam, my spirit in Adam forever, la olam, right? Ba shagam, hu basar, for he is flesh, he's also flesh, for he who basar is flesh, for he is flesh, right? Vechayu Yamayu Meya. Yamayu, this is Yom, right? Yomiu. And his days, Yomiu, his days shall be Meya, 100, right? Va Ezrim, 20, Shana. Okay, so we look at this. So give me some ideas. What do you think about this passage about man's days being 120 years? What are the possibilities there?
I mean, Dr. Pidgeon, I've always agreed with what you had mapped out in the Yom Kadesh book, with the Jubilee years, of looking at that, because it adds up perfectly. And there's so many scriptural connections to back that up, with the 120 Jubilee years equaling the 6,000 days for mankind. It makes perfect sense to me.
100 times the 50-year Jubilee period
Right.
would then equal 6,000 years,
Right.
right? So man's days shall be 6,000 years. Now, a lot of people say, well, look, a Jubilee is only 49 years. Well, not true. A Jubilee is 50 years, even though the sequence may restart in the 50th year. But if you were to say, here a Jubilee, there a Jubilee, everywhere a Jubilee, right? And you were to stack them up instead of adding them as they appear sequentially in the calendar, but rather adding them 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, you would come up 120 Jubilee, 120 years shall be the 50-year Jubilee times 120 gives us 6,000 years. So man's days of dominion over the earth shall be 120 years, 120. Like, for instance, when we see in Jubilees, what do we see? A week of years, right? Now, from our point of view, we don't speak in those terms, a week of years. You might say a plethora of years, or you might say a bunch of years, or a group of years, or a decade maybe, but you don't talk in terms of a week of years. But in the book of Jubilees, they talk specifically in grouping the years into a set of weeks. The first week of years is years 1 through 7, second week of years 8 through 14, third week of years 15 through 21, and so on. And so we see something really strange when you talk about a week of years. And so why doesn't this passage say, yet his years shall be 120 years? That means he's going to live to be 120. But who lived to be 120? No one. You have people that live to be 900, people that live to be 500, you have people that live to be 300, but very few people live to be 120 years. Exactly. And then even David says man's generation is 70 to 80 years, right?
Yeah.
So what are we talking about here? Well, we might be talking about something else. 120 Jubilee years, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. I do too. Something interesting too about this. Went into the book of Jubilees and looking to confirm dates that the Bible sets forth just in the way we count years, because Jubilee starts at 0 and goes forward, but you got to come back the other way. For instance, in Kings, it tells us that when Solomon started building the temple, laid the cornerstone, it was 480 years since the Exodus. Now, the archaeology people all over the world pretty much agree that the date of the cornerstone at Solomon's temple started at 966 BC. Pretty close, plus or minus 3 or 4. So you add 480 years to that, and you come out with a date of 1446 BC.
1446, yeah, as the day of the Exodus. Is that the day of the Exodus or the day of the arrival in the Holy Land?
No, it's the day of the Exodus. When you use that Solomon's temple as the peg in the ground. And then I used that because I was looking for who is the Egyptian mother of Moses, who is the Pharaoh's daughter. And that 1446 date lands right in the upper part of the 18th dynasty. The interesting thing is the Egyptology people and all that know more about the 18th dynasty than any other dynasty in Egypt. And there's only one Pharaoh's daughter. Only one. Hatshepsut. She's the woman that became Pharaoh.
Ah, yes. Yeah.
So they tried to rub her out. See, they did. They tore everything, her name off of all the pylons and everything. But she was discovered by a Frenchman that went down there and was reading, and everybody knew who Tutmos was, Tutmos 1, 2, and 3. But there was this other pharaoh in front of the younger Tutmos 3. And they're like, who is this? And they were just learning to read hieroglyphics. And then That guy wrote a lot of notes, and then 100 years later, an Englishman went down there and knew they had learned more, and he found the name of that other pharaoh, was Hatshepsut. And then he began to look at the text and said, "Hey, this stuff about this pharaoh called Hatshepsut is in the feminine gender. This is a female."
It was a female.
So they
Yeah.
rediscovered her. The question I had after all this is like, well, if they were trying to rub her name out, and the archaeologists, Egyptology people think it's because she was a woman and it was a man's world. You know, there was a gender thing. They didn't ever want another woman pharaoh. But if they were rubbing her out, they didn't do a very good job, because we know who she is now. So who were they trying to rub out? Moses. They rubbed out Moses' name. He was the threat to the throne of Pharaoh. They thought they got rid of him. This is an incredible story. It's the backstory. But anyway, go back to Jubilees. You can go into Jubilees because it tells you the Jubilee dates for when Moses was born, when Joseph was in Egypt. All these are Jubilee dates. But there's a way mathematically to turn those Jubilee dates into present dates of BC. And the date is perfect. When you do that math, you convert those Jubilee years into present day, the dates we use today for that time. It works. That book of Jubilees is a record that tracks the same dates in archaeology that we have today. And forget about that. It tracks the dates of the Exodus, 1446. That's a date that comes from the book of Kings when Solomon built the temple. This is another thing, but Jubilees has some remarkable things in it that confirm the historical record.
Yeah, it's amazing. And this is a book, you know, when we talk, you know, of course, Jubilees is included in the Cepher, right? Jubilees, Enoch, Jasher, all historical record, but not just historical record, incredible record in terms of the theology that's given in the book of Jubilees, right?
And incredible
details. The incredible details in the discussion about who was who and who married who, and you know, and what were the tribes were. And for instance, in Genesis, we get kind of a cryptic story. We get a cryptic story about Lamech in the line of Cain, that he felt bad about what happened because he killed a man and did something else. And we get the whole story. We finally get the whole story when we read in Jasher that Lamech is the one who was out with Tubal-Cain, and Tubal-Cain was the eighth born from Cain, the fallen one, right? Cain, who'd killed Abel. Tubal-Cain was the eighth one. And and Cain was told, I'm going to put this mark on your forehead that, 7 times you shall be protected, right? Well, 7 times, the implication there is 7 generations of Cain shall be protected, shall not come to folly. But Tubal-Cain was the 8th, Lamech being the 7th. And Lamech is out hunting with Tubal-Cain, and Tubal-Cain says, hey, look, there's a deer over there, shoot it. And he shoots, and it turns out he kills Cain with his arrow. He kills Cain with his arrow. And when he realizes, goes over and sees he's killed his great-great-great-great-grandfather, he goes nuts. And he goes nuts, and when he goes nuts, he accidentally beats to death Tubal-Cain. Wow. And the 8th generation, and the last male in the line of Cain, dies out on the spot because the 7-fold generation protection is gone, right? All right, so look, we're going to have to kind of accelerate here because we're running out of time in our discussion point here, but I want to show you something about this particular passage. Look closely at this word right here, okay? Shana. Now you're going to see when we go to look at that, I want you to pay close attention to the 2 comments right there, the 2 comments, those 2 vowel signs. All right, let's move on and let's go to the next page here. Okay, so the word translated as years is the word shana, and not the word shaneh, which is Strong's 8141, meaning a year. Shaneh, you can see that we have here, we've got the kamets here, and we have the segol here, right? So that's shaneh. All right, meaning a year. But Strong's tells us how the word shana, however, which is this word, is the plural or feminine form of the word shaneh. However, this word shaneh comes from the word shana. And shana, you can see here, two comments right there. The primitive root, which means to fold, to duplicate. By implication, to transmute, to do again, to double, to repeat, to return, or to do a second time. And man's years shall be 120 do-overs. Question mark, question mark, question mark. I'm just showing you what's there, right? Okay, let's continue. All right, here's our last verse. Now, this is the verse that we spent quite a bit of time on in the Cepher, and you're going to see why, right? Because this show starts out with this word right here. Now, a lot of people translate this as Nephilim, but it's not. It's Naphalim. It's Naphalim because Nephilim has a yod right there. This doesn't have the yod, and it comes from the root nafal, meaning to fall. Naphalim, Naphalim chayu ba'aretz. We're on the earth, ba'aretz. We're on the earth, right? We're on the earth. Yamim hayam vagam acharichen asher yavo beni Elohim. Beni Elohim. Now here we are again, talking about these children of the elders, if you will, in Tim Alberino's words, right? Right, Chelle?
Right.
The children of the elders, or the elder class, right? Okay. And what? The Beni and let's say Beni al banot ha-adam v'yadu lachem. And they went unto the daughters of men. They went unto the benot ha-adam, the daughters of men. And they bore children. Yaldu lachem, lachem. And hamaha giborim. Now, this is the word here, giborim, asher, min olam, right? Anshi or anoshi, depending on you, if you like O's in your Masoretic text or not. Hashem. Okay, well, now take a look at this for a second, because I'm going to move kind of quickly through this, but we're going to kind of wrap it quickly. If you look at Nafal, again, no yod here, the primitive root meaning to fall, to be cast down, to die off, to divide, the dying ones, the fallen away, the fallen, the fugitive, the inferior, to be judged, right? So they were fallen ones in the earth in those days. It's another way of saying it. You could say the Nephilim or the fallen ones. Now, I mean, the fallen ones could mean a lot of things. We could construe that as these guys fell from heaven. They fell from heaven. They're fallen ones. Or they could be also construed as the fallen ones, that their civilization has fallen. Their civilization fell, and their civilization fell as a result of a cataclysm that preceded the flood. And so their civilization fell. Okay. And so they came out and said, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and make Elohim. We're going to make children in our image. Now, the Giborim, the same became warriors and tyrants. Now, the reason we use warriors and tyrants and not men of renown, as you see in most scripture passages, is because here it is. They're described as Giborim, which by implication powerful, or by implication warriors and tyrants. And so this is the phrase that we used, warriors and tyrants. All right. Then, of course, Mesolam, right? Mesolam. Olam means what? Time out of mind, eternity. So these guys were from eternity. Well, what does eternity mean, really? Okay, so let's look at this for a second. When we talk about this before, generally, time out of mind, past or future. So if we're talking about these Elohim, these Beni Elohim, these Naphalim, were they not from the time that preceded the word Bere'shiyth? They're from the time that preceded the word in the beginning. That precedes this narrative. Yeah. They were Mesolam. They were from this time which preceded the narrative we're having here. Okay. So now Enosh is this middle word, Enosh, which right here, Enoshi, Enoshi, Enosh meaning what? A mortal man, a man in general, but more in particular, a mortal man. And finally, Hashem. Enoshi Hashem. Hashem. The name, right? So we translated this as mortal men of the name. But it might also be understood mortal men of a name. In other words, these were, even though these Nephilim were mortals, and they were from a time out of mind. They were fallen ones from a fallen civilization, from a time out of mind. And these time out of mind, they became mortal men, men of their name. They became renowned in their own name because they were warriors and tyrants. They were warriors and tyrants. They were known. They had big names as warriors and tyrants, like you might say Hercules, or you might say Apollo, or you might say, Achilles, or you might say Poseidon, or some name like this. But you have some name that are given to these people as having immortal kind of names. And they were probably something quite distinguishable from the human life that was on the earth at that time, even though the Elohim were made in their image and in their likeness, right? Okay, so I just wanted to show you that. We looked at that one.
Awesome.
And we can see here, this is the last one here. And then we saw Nephilim, the sons of Anak, which had come out of the Nephilim, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. This is Numbers 13, 32 through 33, showing that there were, in fact, Nephilim after the fall. Okay, guys, so that's that for today. So now, before we go, let's do ourselves a favor and see if we can take a few questions from... Okay, hold on just a second. Hold on, I gotta mute that here. Those guys, I speak too loud here on that. Okay, just a second. I'm gonna see if we've got some questions here in the chat, where we can see if we can, let me see if we can find out what's going on with the chat here. Just a minute. Let's see if I can get it to us here. In the chat here, where are we? Let's see. There we are. No. What's Dutch Sense doing on here? No, Dutch. No, you're out of here. We're not listening to you. Okay. All right. So let's go back in here. I think we will have some questions. If anybody has questions on this, all they have to do now is put them up in the chat and put them in all caps. Okay, so here Betty King is asking a question. When the Most High divided the nations, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the nations according to the number of angels of Yah. Well, I mean, that's a good point, right? When he set the nations according to the number of angels from Yah. All right. So okay. And so Betty says that's from the Song of Moshe in Deuteronomy. All right. Let me see if I can get any more questions going on here. Let's see. Okay. So here's one question. And I'm just going to run it by you guys and let's see what you think. So what are your thoughts on the lunar Sabbath? Chelle, you got any ideas on that?
I'm not looking at a lunar Sabbath. Every time when I look at stuff, I think that I'm looking, what is the nature and character of Yah? And he's not about chaos. I think that he makes things simple. It's the reason that, to me, the whole 120 years with with Jubilee meaning 50, probably to me means 50 and adds up to the 6,000. I think that, the seventh day Shabbat is what makes sense. I mean, this world's hard enough to live in. You want to start trying to do it by the lunar Shabbat? Let's try running that one by my husband's boss, right? I mean, it would throw us into utter chaos.
That's a very good point. And of course, when we look at, so my feeling on the lunar Sabbath is that there's some real issues, because a lot of people want to look at the lunar Sabbath. Well, let's start the count on Wednesday because the heaven and the earth weren't formed until the fourth day. Well, I'm not so sure that that's true, because, we get a connotation reading in Genesis. And again, we read kind of the plain language of the English which is a focused language. It's a reduced translation from the Hebrew, as we've been seeing here by looking at the Hebrew today, that the Hebrew really is quite expansive. And look, we just looked at a couple of verses. We didn't get involved in translating the entire book. We just looked at a few verses and look at what's unfolded. So, you got to keep in mind that there's 60 some countries that call Saturday Sabbath. In Spain, it's Sabado. In Italy, it's Sabato. In Russia, it's Subotu. You have, it's called Sabbath all over the world. And it means the seventh day. And really, Shabbat comes from the word Shaba or Sheba, which means seven. So literally, you would count up the days, Rishon, Sheni, Shelishi, Revi'i, Chamishi. And when you get to seven, it was Shavi, Shavi, and plural, the form of Shavi, Shabbat, right? So that's why I would say that the lunar Sabbath is a theory, but I don't abide by it. I abide in a continuous 7-day Sabbath that is uninterrupted. There's no 8-day or 9-day in the pattern. It goes continuously, and it goes continuously through the years. Okay, so what if 120 years means 120 jubilees? That would equal 6,000 years. Okay, so it's common sense, right? Well, that's kind of what we've been discussing today, right? Okay, and so Randall McFarland says that when Joshua crossed the Jordan, it was the 50th Jubilee. Yeah, it was the first day of the 50th Jubilee, not only according to the book of Jubilees, but it coincides with what Joshua tells us too in Joshua 10. And when Joshua tells us in Joshua 10, he tells us how it took days and days to cross, like 10 days for the house of Israel to cross the Jordan. Now, this begs the question, because when you go to Israel right now, Jordan is smaller than Ship Creek, here in Anchorage. There's no bridge that's needed. Anybody could walk across it. Any animal could walk across it. What are you talking about? It took days and days. And of course, there were millions of people. And there's even discussion about the Jordan having to be stopped, that the water was stopped so that they could cross. So I think, this tells us something too. But at any rate, we see that, this is again, a concise deal. Okay. And Sherry Slama says the flood didn't come until the oldest living man died in 969, right? Methuselah died the year of the flood, right? The oldest man in scripture died, right? All right, let's see if we can get another question here. Let's see what we have here. I want to thank you guys in the chat, by the way. Thank you guys. And listen, if you want to chat in the chat, you have to be a subscriber to the channel, because that's the only way you can chat. Because otherwise, if you're not a subscriber, guess what? We get trolls coming in that are, slamming us with a bunch of porn sites and everything else, and they're not allowed to do that. So we have to keep them off. We police them by making sure that you're a subscriber. Okay. Now, here's another question. Is there any connection with Leviathan and Behemoth, right? Leviathan and Behemoth. Oh, yeah, great questions. And you left out the third one, Tanin, right? Tanin, dragon.
Yeah.
And, and this is something that we found out when we were digging into the Hebrew. We found out, guess what? There's dragons in the Hebrew. And in fact, Aaron's rod did not become a snake, a serpent. It became a dragon.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So, there are connections there. And is Leviathan, there's passages, I think it's in Job, that talks about Leviathan coming back, that, both Leviathan and Behemoth, these huge animals, will be on the earth in the end days. Right. And so we haven't seen that yet. All right. Okay. So even our current Gregorian calendar shows Saturday as the seventh day. Yeah, it does. And of course, Jay Fisher asks, is the Sunday law coming? Comment?
Well, it's hard to tell. It was interesting what just happened not long ago when they went up to do the 10 commandments, I guess, of like in Egypt, right? That ceremony.
Last week.
Yeah, not long. Time's going, so much is happening so fast, right? But yeah, it's interesting how that confederation, when you look on the website of who was putting that on, you may as well have just been looking at a coexist bumper sticker. That's what it looks like,
Yeah.
So there's definitely something coming together, and whether it goes towards the Noahide setting things up, or whether the universal church, it's probably going more towards the universal church, wouldn't you think? Because I think that with the Noahide, they're going to say, no, that's not for anybody but the Jews, and not you dogs.
That's all I have to say. Okay, John, are you familiar with a book called The Saturn Death Cult?
No, I don't think I've heard that. What is that?
I don't think I've heard of it. William Krajewski asked that question, and I haven't heard that either. I haven't heard of that. So Adam, I would say no, I haven't heard of it. No. And was not Adam made from that which was created? Yeah, I mean, all rights reserved. Yes, of course. They took the dust of the earth, right? But what is the neshama chayim that was blown into his nostrils, right? And what came in when he became nefesh chaya, when he became a living soul, not just living flesh. He was not just living besara, but he was a living soul. And so this is a question. I mean, it's a good question, but there was definitely dust in the equation for sure. Okay. And I want to thank you guys for, go ahead, Chelle.
Do you think, Dr. Pidgeon, I mean, one of the things that interests me in this whole subject, when we're talking about, what happened with mankind losing, say, that light covering, right? Here's this thing that's dangled between, and certainly I don't see a snake slithering on the ground. I see a being that would be recognizable as other beings were, that she wasn't running away, he wasn't running away in terror, right? She's having a discussion with this being, and there was something dangled that said, well, then you'll be like us, and it was desirable, and so it says that the serpent came to her in a subtle, crafty way. And then when you look at the root word for that, for subtle, and then you look at the root word for naked, they're two different Hebrew words, but they share a primitive root. It is the same primitive root out of the two. So to me, it's more about function than form. If they realized they were naked, they realized that they had taken on the nature of the fallen seed of the seed of the serpent.
Yeah, this serpent, whatever that is, says it's the most subtle, clever beast of the field. All these beasts of the field were created on day 6.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody's surprised that this thing spoke, and she's carrying on a conversation. So what exactly was that?
Right.
What of all the creatures created on the 6th day, which one is the smartest? It's that male and female.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just throwing that out there. So,
yeah, I mean, it's a good point. It's a good point, John. I mean, and
that was not an Adam or an Eve she was talking to. That was a male or female she was talking. That was a 6th day beast.
Great creature.
Mm-hmm.
And the beast is coming in the end. All these things in Daniel and all that, they're all, the beast. The beast. Yeah. This is not an Adam and Eve.
Everything to me that we're looking at it all revolves around the war of the seed, right? From the very beginning, it's the war of the seed. I mean, we've got these rebellious the rebellions of, say, the elder race. We know of 3 of them in particular. We saw Hasatan, or the adversary, wanting to be promoted and be the one that receives the worship, right? And so we've got the desire for worship there, and there were the 3 temptations of Yahusha, and what was one of them? That if you'll just worship me, then I'll give you the kingdoms, right? And then we've got the rebellion of mating with women. We've got a lust of the flesh. And what was it? Here, eat this, make this stone into bread. So there was the same temptation that Yahusha overcame. We've got, the pride
Make
of
this
life.
stone into bread. Very good point, Chelle, before you get to the third one, because you're talking about converting something of a stone into bread. You're talking about some intrinsic conversion, some aspect that's going to convert the very essence of the matter itself,
Right.
Yeah.
a stone, into bread, right?
Right.
Okay. And our third one,
We've got the Tower of Babel, and so what is that if it's not the pride of life? It's power, it's position, it's the pride. Look what we can do. And so, I mean, these are the three temptations that were given. I mean, you can see the nature of the Nephilim seed all the way through.
Yeah, very good point. Very good point. Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap her up here. I want to thank you, Chelle Wagner. Great job. Thank you, John Barr. Your contributions as panelists have been outstanding. I was going to do like, what's his name? The old Sunday afternoon panel. So, let's go to Chelle Wagner. But I decided that style wasn't going to be the one I was going to use. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. And I want to thank everybody that are subscribers and that have been part of this program, who've been taking part in the chat. Thank you guys for being here. And thank you for supporting the Cepher Publishing Group and supporting our work in the field. It really makes a difference to us all. I mean, it really does. Thank you. And may a huge blessing pour out on all of you. Chelle, shalom and blessings to you. John, Baruch atah, my brother. And we will see you guys again soon, okay?
Yeah,
Amen.
shalom. Thank you, Dr. Pidgeon. I
Thank you very
appreciate it.
much. Thank
Good
you,
to see you, John.
everyone.